tea so much. It's got little candy canes in it, like little candy canes, but they do look like shrimp. It's just a little guy. Alright, so I'm recording this in the evening because the sun started to set today at 2:30 p.m. and I was not going to have this video finished filming before then. So here we are at night. So fall 2023 was not a great time for my personal life or for my mental health, but I did end up reading a lot. I ended up reading 18 books in, I guess, 2.5 months, which is more than I usually read. So let me walk you through a few of them. I've got my tea, I've got my Christmas tea, I've got some pomegranates to snack on. So yeah, let's go. First off, we've got Catcher in Elise by Liana Cusmano. This was published by Guernica Editions, which is a Canadian press. So Catcher in Elise is about a young person who's coming to terms with her sexuality and a bit of mental illness, and she's handling the repercussions of when she was in high school and into university, she was groomed by one of her high school teachers. That impacts her relationship with her sexuality as well. I think I would have loved a book like this when I was in high school. I think I would have felt very seen. Then I read Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson. This is my first Jeanette Winterson book, which I think is kind of weird. I don't think is how people normally approach this book as their first Jeanette Winterson, but yeah, after this I do really look forward to reading the rest of her work. I do have Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, and I think I might try to read that over the winter. But Frankenstein is a Frankenstein retelling. It's, or more so, a retelling of the story behind Frankenstein. So our main character, we do back and forth between like 1816 to 1818 Mary Shelley's actual life. We get a little bit of kind of biography intertwined with the present day. And the present day is set in contemporary Britain, and we have Rye Shelley, who is a trans doctor, and Rye meets a different version of Lord Byron, who has made these new sex dolls that are really big on the market right now, and he's doing very well. And we also have someone called Victor Stein, who specializes in AI. And yeah, the book is sort of this pretty weird experimental book on AI and science and where we're going with it, but very much with these themes of Frankenstein all built into it. Next, I have The Economy of Sparrows by Trevor Harriott. This is an advanced reading copy that I got to review, and this was published by Thistledown Press, which is a Canadian press. The first novel by Trevor Harriott, but who is a well-published nature writer, and you can really see that in the book. The parts where we get nature described, or we have these images of nature as metaphor, those are by far the strongest parts. So we follow this woman, Nell, and she has inherited her family's farm, and she's basically throughout the book tackling what it means to own that land. And we have this character called Carmelita, who's a 15-year-old who Nell fosters. And so it's a little slow, it's a little technical, but I thought it was really cool. And I've got here more of like an art book, but it's The Making of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Importantly, not the movie Mary Shelley's Frankenstein by Kenneth Branagh. That's not what this is. It's really just about the backstory behind the book, which I do know pretty well at this point. The origin story of Frankenstein, of Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley going to Lord Byron's villa in Switzerland on Lake Geneva, and it's the year without a summer. And Byron proposes that they all write a ghost story, and Mary, with the baggage of her literary parents, her dead children, and the exile that she's now facing, and she's barely 18, collects these like manuscripts and textual elements and paintings and that kind of thing to really do a really big overview of what that history is. And so I think it's really great. It's using a lot of the archives from the Bodleian Library. It's actually published by the Bodleian at Oxford. And so, and they do have a massive Mary Shelley archives collection. Daisy Hay wrote Young Romantics that must have come out like 10 years ago at this point, but goes through the history of the younger generation of Romantics. So that includes the Shelleys, Byron, John Keats, and a few other people in their circle and how their lives were all intertwined. And so coming back to that author, I thought was very fun. And so, yeah, she put this together and I think put it together very well. And then I read Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism by Christian R. Godseed. I read the audiobook of this. I guess it's kind of in the title, but we've got histories, personal stories, statistics and studies. In socialist societies and structures, women tend to be more liberated, more sexually liberated than they are under capitalist structures, just because of how resources are distributed and how hierarchies are shifted. Women aren't at a disadvantage automatically like they are in capitalist structures, and they don't have to sometimes end up relying on men or patriarchal structures to get by, and so they can have more freedom and more liberation and have better sex. I found the statistics portions really tedious to have someone read them out, whereas I feel like on the page it would be easier to see at a glance what the statistics were saying and how they were organized, whereas I had to pause when I was listening to the audiobook and kind of map out how the table would look if it was actually written down in front of me. But that was one thing that I struggled with. Other than that, I thought it was pretty cool. The Old English Baron by Clara Reeve is a classic English Gothic novel. And Reeve is partially responding to Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, which was the big sort of fire starter for a lot of the English Gothic tradition. And what Reeve is doing is she's actually trying to make it more grounded and more realistic. And the introduction kind of frames this as more of a thought experiment, more so than her writing like a proper novel. She's really trying to play here on the form. And that made a lot of sense to me because the book is kind of silly and kind of predictable, and then at times just sort of tedious, but I think it still worked. I really enjoyed it. It's about this guy, this knight, who after the war we're set in like the medieval period here. After a war is over, he goes to find his friend from childhood that he's not seen in like 20 years. And he goes to find that friend and finds out that the friend has died a long time ago. And this guy was like a lord or a baron. And his estate has been passed on to like a cousin or whatever. And so our knight goes to that town and like goes to find what's going on there. And he runs into this young man and he's like, wow, this young man is the pinnacle of like kindness and honor and the quintessential perfect young knight, except he's not. He's like a lower class man who's been like adopted by the Baron's sons as like a friend and a brother. And throughout the book, it's just everybody obsessing over like, oh my god, this guy is the perfect guy. Sucks that he's lower class though. Fawning over this guy or jealous of him because he's so perfect. And it turns out he looks exactly like our knight's best friend from childhood. Why? I wonder why. There's sword fights, there's ghosts, there's haunted houses. I thought it was really fun. There's a lot of gay yearning also. Like we've got some homoerotic knight situation going on. This is O Caledonia by Elspeth Barker. And this was published originally in the 90s and then was sort of forgotten and has recently been reprinted and recirculated. It's a very atmospheric novel about a young girl who's she's a teenager. She lives in the Scottish Highlands, and at the beginning of the book we find out that she's been murdered. But the bulk of the book is jumping back to before she was murdered, and we're just getting to know this girl, and we follow her different relationships, her life on the Highlands. Yeah, I thought it was really lovely and just beautiful, beautiful prose, and I had forgotten that she's like supposed to die until the very end. We kind of come back around to it, and we sort of, on the very last page, get the big hint of who would have done it. And then I read A House Unsettled by Trin Delaney, and this was published by Annick Press in Canada. So we've got here a contemporary queer gothic haunted house novel. In the book we meet Asha, who's a teenager who's just moved to her mom's small town, and the house that they live in is haunted. It's an old family house, and so there's a theme throughout the book is generational trauma and racism and how that looks in a small town that is very white. Delaney did a really good job of acknowledging and knowing what the tools of the genre are and using those tools to do something new. And then I read Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica. This one has the premise of, what if one day humans became allergic to all animals, and so as a meat substitute we decided to basically farm raise humans and eat them. So yeah, it's a commentary on like the violence of humanity, just gross farm practices. Yeah, I didn't really like this very much, if I'm being honest, which I am. I think it's a really cool concept, but beyond the concept, I found the execution just not there. We open up with, weirdly, the narrator kind of explaining the world to us, which I felt very weird. I didn't like that. I like us to be able to figure stuff out along the way, and the narrator to present it to us as though it's very matter of fact, like they're actually living in this life. And it's not written as though it's addressed to a person. It's just, I think it starts off kind of over-explaining it. And that kind of set me off from the start. I was like, I wanted to know less. Yeah, throughout I found it just wasn't really working for me. I didn't buy the story. I didn't buy the concept that, like, our narrator, who's not an old man, he's just like a young to middle-aged man, like, he like remembers a time before we were breeding humans and like talks about that transition, but I just don't buy that. So I ended up like, I just kept feeling like I was poking holes in the plot and in the universe throughout the book. And I didn't feel any particular way about the characters either. I can get over sort of a weak world if the characters are really good or if the writing is really good, but I didn't find that. I think the end was kind of cool and shocking, but that's kind of it. I think this actually would have done really well as a short story, like much shorter than this, because I feel like this had too much room to do too much explaining, and also gave us room to just not really care anymore, or me. And so I think if it was at least half this length, I think it could have been a really cool short story / novella. But yeah, I think this was too much page count for what it was. Next, I read The Little Kid with the Big Green Hand by Matthew K. Gubler. That name might sound familiar if you are a fan of Criminal Minds, or if, like me, you don't like Criminal Minds, but you do like his treehouse.
I hand-built this fireplace because the masons that were doing it were kind of too skilled, and I wanted it to look like a drunk gnome had built it in the 1800s, and I'm the only person who's bad enough at masonry to build exactly like a drunk gnome.
Honestly, dream home. He wrote a kid's book, and it's very weird and very cute, and it's about accepting, not just accepting your flaws, but like finding something new and interesting with your so-called flaws. It's what I thought it would be. Next, my one and only poetry book that I read in all of autumn, which is weird. But this is Steadfast by Ali Blythe. This is a retelling of John Keats's final poem, which was called Bright Star. It's a sonnet written to Fanny Braun. And beautiful, beautiful poem. Love it. And what Ali Blythe does here is takes a line or like a fragment of the line and breaks it down and writes a poem based on that one fragment. And so the first poem is, or the first line of the poem by John Keats is Bright Star, whatever steadfast as thou art. And so Ali Blythe splits that into 3 different poems. So we have Bright Star, the poem by Ali Blythe. And then we get Would I Were Steadfast, and the poem by Ali Blythe, and then As Thou Art. And it continues like that. Ali Blythe like interjecting a new layer of this love story. The first poem starts out strong. I liked the first one. That's always a good sign. And then I found that maybe every other poem I really liked. I didn't like all of them, which is normal, but I found that I liked fewer than I didn't like overall. Really cool experiment. I really like Ali Blythe's poetry, and so this was really great. Oh yeah, and this was published by Ice House Poetry, which is an imprint of Goose Lane Editions, Canadian small press. All right, then I read Henry James' Turn of the Screw and Other Ghost Stories. It was really great. I really like Henry James, and I just hadn't read any of these really, but I hadn't read Turn of the Screw, and I wanted to read Turn of the Screw. It's one of his most famous works. It's been adapted so many times and retold. I loved The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix, which is Turn of the Screw. I knew already what it was about. I've read a lot of literary criticism that talks about Turn of the Screw, so I wasn't surprised by a whole lot, but it was nice to have read it. And the other stories I did read, I didn't like all of them, which is normal. I did like the first one a lot. The Romance of Certain Old Clothes I found genuinely spooky. I read When Sunlight Tiptoes by Jillian Shi, illustrated by So-Yeon Kim. This is a baby board book, and I will count it in my reading wrap-up because it's still a book. Really, the text is a beautiful, lovely poem by Jillian Shi. It's about appreciating the sunlight and a new day, life in the city, going around to markets, and beautiful illustrations. It's currently wrapped up under a tree because it's for my friend's baby. So I wanted to read it first to make sure it was good. Then I read Piranesi by Susanna Clark. This was really cool, okay? So it's about Piranesi, who's a guy who lives alone in a vast, vast world. And I had seen a lot of people talking about this book and recommending them whose tastes I really generally like, but they all said, I'm not going to tell you what it's about. Don't read anything about the plot. And also, the first few pages are a drag, but like pay attention and keep reading, and it'll make sense. Normally, that is a red flag for me. I don't know. I've been burned too many times with that pitch. I was very hesitant to pick it up with that being the pitch. But I listened. I didn't look up what it was about. I read the first few pages and I was like, I hate this, but I hear it makes sense soon, so fine. And I kept reading and it was good. So I'm gonna keep that pitch for you and just trust me on it. And also the fact that you shouldn't really know exactly what it's about before going into it, and then you find out, doesn't mean that it's only good for one read. which I do find sometimes when people pitch it that way. It's just like, oh, there's just like a twist that then once you know the twist, it's ruined. That's not what this is. But I do want to reread it. I would like to experience the whole thing again, knowing what the framework is and what's really going on in the background. So, yeah, would recommend it. Stunning prose. Love the writing here. And I liked Piranesi. I think he was really sweet. I could see how he would be annoying, but I liked him. And then another great one, A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt. This is a memoir. I think some of the reviews said it's poetic essays, which I think is accurate. Billy Ray Belcourt is a queer Indigenous poet whose writing is just beautiful. I broke out my highlighter for this one. I don't really highlight books very much anymore. I usually dog ear or write with a pen or pencil or use a sticky tab. I don't really highlight that much right now. But I brought the highlighter for this just because there was so much in here that I really wanted to get in and get those very specific lines. Themes of sexuality, loss, family, grief. And I went to a few networking events after I read this, like in the weeks following. And what a lot of people do is ask you, like at literary networking stuff, they'll ask like, oh, it's a book that you read recently that you like, if they've run out of questions to ask. And this was one that I was like very happy to say, like, oh, I read this recently and I really loved it. I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a novel. We follow Kathy, Tommy, and Ruth. They go to a very isolated boarding school in England. And we follow their years at the boarding school and then a little bit after. So I had actually seen the movie a few years ago. I mean, a long time ago at this point, actually, at least 10 years ago. So I knew like what the story was. And kind of like I was saying about Piranesi, a lot of people say like, you don't want to know what this is actually about before you start reading it. Like you'll find out and that'll be an experience. And in this one, I already knew what was happening, and I found that kind of took away a little bit from the reading experience. So I might not have enjoyed it as much as I would have if I hadn't known what the book was about. But yeah, it's not really very much about the setting or about what is happening in the background. It's about the relationships between these three young people, and the love that they have for each other, the sacrifices that they make, and yeah, the end I thought was really lovely. It kind of dragged a little in the middle for me. I was like, okay, let's go. But then the last few chapters were actually really moving and yeah, made me sad. Then I read Catherine House by Elizabeth Thomas. I read this right after Never Let Me Go because I realized I had a few like dark academia books on my shelf that I thought it would be fun to read through. But what I didn't realize is that it's not a Never Let Me Go retelling, but it hits a lot of the same beats and has the same like twists. And what I didn't realize, because I think I had bought this a long time ago, but we have our description on the front and side tab here, and then it continues to the back. Never looked at the end of the description on the back because I had been sold from the beginning of it. But at the end it says that it has basically the same setting as Never Let Me Go. And it does. So having read them back to back was weird, having not done that intentionally. This is about Ines, who goes to an isolated liberal arts college in the middle of Pennsylvania, I think, New England. And something is afoot. So what makes this school special is that it's super elite, barely anyone gets into it, but if you get into it, no tuition. There's no tuition, but you have to leave your entire life behind. No contact with your family or friends, no contact with news, technology, no summer breaks. You spend 3 years there in a bubble. But you basically guarantee if you graduate, you will emerge like very successful, very influential. And so that concept was interesting. And then when we get more stuff going on, I didn't find that as interesting. They spend a lot of time drinking tea and wine and eating cookies, and I really liked that. I don't know, I thought the concept was very cool and the beginning was very cool, and as we got more of the world, I didn't care very much. I really liked Ines as a character and a narrator because she's quite passive, but she does still have a rich inner world, and so I thought that was very cool. My last read of the season was Advocating for Palestine in Canada, Histories, Movements, Actions, and it was published by Fernwood Publishing in Canada. They're based in Winnipeg. So it's what it says in the title, really. It's a collection of essays about the Canadian response to the fight over Gaza and Palestine over the years. It was published in 2022, so it is very recent and very up-to-date, except it obviously doesn't cover the recent escalation that has been happening in the last few months. So a lot of the stats are outdated in terms of, deaths and destruction and loss, but the Canadian response to the genocide has largely remained the same. So yeah, politicians continue to reject BDS efforts and criticisms of Israel. Major Canadian companies are supporting the IDF financially. Universities and newspapers very much silence support of Palestine, and all of which results in misinformation for Canadians and results in Canadian money being poured into the IDF. And this, I think the other day, Canada did vote in favor of calling for a ceasefire finally, but that is far from enough. But yeah, if you're interested in reading more about Palestine, Verso Books recently made public, or not public, but free PDFs of a lot of their books on Palestine, and I will drop that link in the bio. Reading obviously is not the only way that you can and should be making a difference here. It is but one tool of many. You can help raise awareness, you can write to your representatives, you can keep going to protests, keep striking, keep boycotting. You can support your local organizations and businesses that have showed support for Palestine. You can also donate and do your research. Let me know what you've been reading lately and what you're excited to read for next year. And stay cozy, I guess.